Um, yeah, well, one of our volunteers, had his experience, and we were talking about it, and the nurse in the room at the time said, "Oh, that sounds like one of my crazy dreams," and the volunteer said, "No, it's way different than a dream." And he said, there's more, temporal, continuity. It's got a beginning and a middle and an end that you can really track.
Mm.
Um, and the storyline is more coherent, from beginning to end. I think what may be the case, although I haven't made a super precise comparison, is lucid dreaming in the DMT state.
Mm.
David J. Brown wrote a book. I forget what it's called. But it's about lucid dreaming, and he makes a lot of comparisons. Um, uh, Between the DMT state and lucid dreaming. But I'm not an authority on lucid dreaming. It makes a lot of sense that endogenous DMT would be involved in the dream state.
Mhm.
It's out of body, or it's non-physical anyway. Colorful, inhabited, interactive. So there must be some contribution of DMT, to the dream state, and you can formulate some psychopharmacological methods or means by which that occurs. Um, there are um, there there are high concentrations of DMT in the mammalian brain, in the rodent. We know that paper came out 5 years ago. But we still do not know in what states or conditions there's more DMT released or synthesized, or there's less. The obvious place to start looking in a rodent, which would be kind of barbaric, but still it would yield important data, is our levels of DMT in the dreaming rodent brain, higher than in the non dreaming rodent brain. Well, I think that is part of the DMT state, but it's also reported with other psychedelics. Um, is the sense of being at home, or familiarity. That opens up a can of worms, because is it because that state is familiar, or is it because there's a part of your brain that regulates the sense of familiarity, and is being dinged by DMT and other psychedelics, and I think that relates to the feeling of the state being more real than real. Um, the is it because it's more real than real, or is it because just some part of your brain is lighting up that mediates the sense of reality? Um, it's interesting to speculate on a role. Excuse me, on a role for naturally occurring DMT in the brain. Is it regulating our sense of reality? And I think, the two are quite closely linked, familiarity and reality, sense, like, I really feel, grounded and familiar and connected, to this experience. Um, yeah, so that is a hallmark of the state, and, with other psychedelics too. Yeah, well, we don't know what regulates the synthesis, the synthesis of endogenous DMT. So that needs to be stated up front.
Yeah.
Um, the other point, which makes a lot of sense, is to the extent that non-drug states resemble those brought on by DMT, that naturally occurring DMT is playing a role in those non-drug states. So there's all kinds of technologies or techniques that can produce a DMT-like state. There's, breathing exercises, there's drumming, there's sleep deprivation, there's stress, there's, dreams, there's meditation, all kinds of things. Yeah, but objectively, we don't really, we can't really, measure, DMT in the blood very accurately. The most important thing will be to, visualize its, synthesis in the living human brain. John Dean is doing that at UCSD right now, looking to, develop a means of visualizing using MR spectroscopy, synthesis of DMT in the living brain. Um, you know, it's a very strange thing. There's one person in the world right now who's looking at the synth or the regulation of DMT synthesis. And that's a very strange thing. You look at psilocybin clinical trials. There's 150 trials going on looking at psilocybin for everything under the sun.
Right.
Zero indications. So far there are no approved indications. And there's one guy in the world looking at the synthesis of endogenous DMT, which is, I think, a much more existentially remarkable, question. What is endogenous DMT, doing in the mammalian brain? Um, I don't know. I don't know. It's not a quick fix. It isn't like you
Yeah.
give, psilocybin to eating disorder patients and they stop being eating disordered. That's kind of like, okay, this is a study. Endpoint is this, questionnaires and weight and things. Um, Yeah, but it's a rabbit hole if you start looking at what is endogenous, DMT. Well, first of all, it's extremely difficult, technically. You just don't give, psilocybin and give questionnaires and then you follow up once or twice. It's really hardcore. It requires a lot of, technology and machinery and thinking and physics and all that. So, it could be, laziness or expediency. You can do other studies more easily and cheaper. Um, but I think, more perhaps, theoretically overarching, question is, where's it going to lead?
Mm.
And I think that may be, why people are a little more, gingerly approaching it. Well, like one person out of the world who's looking at endogenous DMT. So, well, it also, begs, the question of why Michael Pollan, uh, you know, mentions our study in one or two, sentences as in his entire book, How to Change Your Mind.
Yeah.
Uh, and, and he has, no references at all to any of our publications. And I think it's because it didn't, fit into the narrative of, psychedelics are groovy. They'll give you spiritual experiences and they'll help, cure illnesses. On the contrary, our DMT study, demonstrated if you don't coach people, if you don't, prime them to have a particular kind of experience, the experiences are all over the map. And what is, DMT, doing, in the human brain? So the
Yeah.
questions that both exogenous, like outside administered, DMT and naturally, synthesized, DMT raise are, not easily answered.